Hello from Benchakiri Park in the heart of Bangkok. My name is Sanchir and I'm currently slow traveling the world in search of my new home. I left my job in May of 2024 this year after experiencing severe burnout. After 6 months, I feel well rested and like myself again. Stay tuned to learn how I used slow traveling around the world to detox after burnout. Before I dive in, I'd like to cover the definition of burnout for those that may not be familiar with the topic. According to the APA Dictionary of Psychology, burnout is physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitude towards oneself and others. It results from performing at a high level until stress and tension, especially from extreme and prolonged physical or mental exertion or an overburdening workload, take their toll. So what is my story with burnout? I got my undergrad and grad degrees, moved to New York City right after college for my first job, worked at the world headquarters of the company that I worked for, and later joined one of the biggest high-tech companies in the world. Looking back, I think there were signs of burnout a few years into my career before the topic of burnout was even widely acknowledged or discussed about 10 years ago. I think the initial onset of burnout was caused by extreme long hours. I'm talking about 12 to 15 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. Later in my career, as I progressed up the corporate ladder, my burnout, I think, was exacerbated by stress. Over time, I could feel myself deteriorating mentally, emotionally, and physically. You could imagine what kind of a shape I was in by the time I decided to leave my career after working for 12 years. So now I want to get into how I used slow traveling around the world to heal and detox after burnout. For purposes of this discussion, I want to break it down into different stages. Stage 1, I'll call it, when I realized that I was burnt out. Stage 2 is planning for my time off. Stage 3, just resting and nothing else. Stage 4 is traveling for 6 months around the world without any inhibitions. And stage 5 is really the awakening period. Looking back, my burnout is really rooted in 2 mistakes. Mistake number 1 was always going above and beyond the expectations and wanting to perform at a higher level, and also putting in such long hours. Mistake number 2 is thinking that purpose in my life would be found in my career. When I've gone through the schooling system when I was younger, all I thought about was, get the good grades, get into that good college, get a sensible degree, get a job right after college. Everything would be taken care of and happily ever after, right? Wrong. I've recently started to sort of discover the work of Vicki Robin. In one of her recent talks, I think it was in the film Playing with Fire, she had said that the concept of work, job, income, and identity are distinct and separate concepts, and that nowadays a lot of people conflate the 4 concepts together or think that they're the same thing. It seems so obvious now that I think about it, but I really used to think that. I used to think that having that good career, having that good salary would sort of take care of everything else. And all that just means that I was really asleep at the wheel. I was driving through life on autopilot. So how do these sort of mistakes relate to my burnout? I think simply put, I was just expecting too much out of my job. Truth be told, corporate life is full of meaningless tasks and projects. So when you add time pressure and toxic office politics into play in completing these tasks, it just requires more willpower out of you to get them done. And every career job isn't perfect all the time. I think that's unrealistic to expect that. But when sort of your day-to-day work life is littered with these things that you have to navigate, and you're having to draw down on your willpower at such high frequency and for a prolonged period of time, I think that's what really leads to that sense of burnout. It doesn't help if you're also putting in long hours too. So now that I've explained some of the root causes of my burnout, let's go over how I saw burnout sort of manifest itself in my life. The first sign was a loss of interest in things that I once used to enjoy, or loss of interest in exploring new things. Sign number 2 is excessive shopping. In my case, I started to notice that shopping was more of a coping mechanism, right? With stress and wanting to feel a little bit of excitement in my day-to-day. So I started to get into online shopping, and I was buying stuff that ultimately had very little utility in my day-to-day life. Sign number 3 is sort of engaging in escapism through spontaneous trips around the world. The kind of traveling that I was doing was really travel without any purpose. I was going to all of these sites because some influencer on YouTube or Instagram told me that it was a cool spot to visit. Now, I didn't really think about whether that specific place, city, or site had any meaning to me. I just simply went there because that's where everybody was going. That's the kind of traveling that I was using, and that was really my form of escapism. The last sign that I experienced was general irritation, and this one really bothered me the most because I'd like to think that I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky person. I want to be a pleasant person to deal with, and I think ultimately that was the catalyst for me to think about changing my life, because I felt that my life was headed in a direction that I just didn't agree with. So after many months of careful planning and consideration, I decided to leave my job. I think from the time that I decided to leave my job to when I actually quit my job was about 12 months. I stayed this long primarily for financial reasons. So in planning for my time off, I wanted to take at least 1 year off. So financially, I had saved up 12 months of living expenses as my sabbatical budget, and an additional 12 months of living expenses as an emergency fund. I wanted an emergency fund just so that I had some cushion if anything were to happen during my time off, or let's say I was enjoying my time off so much that I wanted to extend it. In that case, I wanted some additional funds to be able to do that. And another important aspect of planning for my sabbatical was penciling in rest time of at least 4 weeks. So during my time of rest, I didn't have an alarm clock. I started to go to my local public library to check out books that I've always had on my list of, things that I wanted to read but never had the time. I kicked my workout routine into gear. I started to make meals at home, and I really enjoyed doing that. And also I started to plan for my trip that was supposed to last 3 months initially. So one of the really important things for my period of rest was I intentionally chose not to overcommit to anything. I did not put any pressure on myself to have answers to the question of what's next. My anxiety and restlessness were kept to a minimum during this time because I had intentionally set an objective to rest and not think about the future. And because I was doing exactly that, I felt productive in some ways. And I think that's why I didn't really experience any anxiety right after I left my job. So after a month of rest, I began to travel. And during the span of 3 months, I traveled all throughout Asia, ended up visiting 6 countries and 12 cities during that time. And I think I want to pause here and reflect on why I chose to travel, because I really could have picked anything to occupy my time during my sabbatical. I think I chose to travel because it represents a sense of ultimate freedom. You're not tied down to your normal obligations that you would have at home, and really you could do anything that you wanted to or become anyone that you wanted to. And I think this is especially true when you solo travel, when you're more in tune with your surroundings because you're not occupied by your travel companion. For me personally, I chose to travel, but I really think that it could be anything, such as learning to play guitar, learning a new language. My word of advice to you when you're planning your time off is to choose an activity that most energizes you. Traveling gave me 3 unexpected benefits. First, I was no longer in an environment that reminded me of my prior burnt out life. Secondly, I didn't really have the time to be in my head and second guess my decision to leave my job. And thirdly, time away from home gives you a completely new perspective on life, and it sort of leaves you with a clear head to evaluate what really was working and what really wasn't working for you. Now I want to talk about what I started to notice within myself after having taken a couple of months of rest and traveling. First, I began to notice the joy and beauty in everyday life. I also began to notice kindness that others showed to others and towards myself in the day-to-day interactions. I also found humor in random things throughout my day, and I also started to show interest in the things that I used to enjoy, and I had more energy to want to explore new things. I think this is a crucial time to dig deep and articulate to yourself what is it that you value most in life, and how can you structure your life to bring you closer to that vision. Not many of us have really put in the time to answer these questions, and when we do, I think that inner conversation is most often driven by fear and societal expectations, and not necessarily what might be right for you. I think it's really important to be honest with yourself and not let fear drive that inner conversation. Let's put it this way. What would you be doing if you knew for 100% certainty that you would not fail at it? What really helped me to clearly articulate all of this is journaling. I used to dread journaling because I was always so self-critical of what was coming out on paper. You might avoid journaling for the same reasons. So I would encourage you to move past the negative self-talk and just, practice jotting down your stream of consciousness down onto your notebook and really practice listening to your inner voice. And over time, there will be clarity in your thinking and vision for yourself. Once you have some clarity, you're ready to begin taking the steps that you need to get there. I think it's really important to recognize that your vision and the things that you might want to pursue next doesn't have to be so polished and perfect and well thought out. And once you sort of have a rough shape or an idea of what it is that you want to be doing, that's when you are ready to start taking the steps to get there. At this point in my journey of recovery from burnout, I'm more in tune with my inner voice. That inner voice that told me to leave my job and begin traveling. That voice that told me that I really needed to take rest. Keep listening and honoring that inner voice. It will begin to show you the new life that you could be leading. Once it's been revealed to you though, it's important to not let fear or anxiety keep you from going after what it is that you want. I hope that my story of recovery from burnout was helpful to you. I plan to make more content in the future about taking a sabbatical, moving abroad, adult gap year, so please stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.